So I've heard the term that cattle are great recyclers. So in addition to eating grass and eating corn or whatever grain we might feed them, so what are they talking about as far as being a recycler?
Okay, so when we talk about recycling, there's several different ways we can look at it. One way, and I'll just mention this briefly, is cattle can get by with, when we look at food quality, a lower quality food source than a lot of other species, because from an instance, a nitrogen or protein standpoint, if they don't use it initially, they recycle it back in their system and can use it before they excrete it out. But what most people think about when we talk about that is the use of co-products or byproducts. And so when we look at different segments of the industry, there may be something, so let's take soybeans, for example. And so when you go into the grocery store and you look at vegetable oil, what a lot of that actually is soybean oil. And so we'll take that soybean and crush it, and we take that oil and use on the human side for consumption, but then what we left is we have a high protein supplement called soybean meal, and so cattle can consume that. Same thing if we were extracting whole cottonseed for oil, would have cottonseed meal left, which cottonseed meal doesn't work real well on other species, but works great on cattle. So we can take something that otherwise wouldn't have a use that's a real high quality food stuff for cattle. Another example of that is when we look at the ethanol industry. So if we take corn grain and we ferment the starch to produce ethanol, we're going to have some protein and some fat and some minerals left, and we would call that product dry distiller's grains or distiller's grains. And cattle can consume that, and that's a high protein, high energy source for them. So that's some examples of some of the things they could utilize that wouldn't maybe get utilized in other areas.
So I heard there's like beer, there's a byproduct from beer called Brewers grain.
Absolutely.
What is that?
So when we look at Brewers grains, they're going to use the hops in some of those grains to ferment to produce that beer. But then there's, if you want to call it a waste product, in the livestock industry, we don't look at it as a waste product, but the beer companies do. Well, rather than that product going into a landfill, it is a great high quality feed for cattle. So that's another example of one of those co-products we could use.
And I was in a feed yard that they had a whole big, large bin of sunflowers.
Yep.
Seeds, and I asked them, what are you doing? So, well, they weren't deemed acceptable for human use, so we purchased them to use for livestock. So
right.
Does that happen a lot? Or?
It does happen from time to time, depending on the product. It happens more often than others. And the thing to realize is there may not have been any safety issue with that product at all, but from a quality standpoint, it wasn't the quality level that that company was looking for to sell it in human consumption. Or maybe it was a year where we had a surplus of product and there was more product than they could sell in the human market. Then we can take some of those and utilize in the livestock industry.
Yeah, if you looked at them, seeds were all cracked, a little bit. So I'm sure when you get a bag of sunflowers, you always like the perfect seed.
Absolutely.
They weren't perfect seeds by any means.
So what the company did was sort them out, and then we have those that we can then use in the livestock industry. Another example would be the peanuts. I was visiting with a producer Tuesday of this week who actually was getting some peanut skins. Well, we're not talking about the hull, but there's a little thin layer on the outside of that actual peanut that we call a skin that he was getting, and then it had some broken pieces of peanuts that obviously didn't make the grade to go on. So he was able to buy that, and that's a high quality product we can feed those livestock as well. Specifically ruminants like cattle are able to utilize those type of products.
I heard somebody say what I thought was kind of funny and kind of helped me better understand the value of cattle, is that the cattle have a superpower. We have all these superheroes now. We have a superpower, and that was their ability to take all of these feeds and convert high quality protein. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that makes cattle or any ruminants different than what we would call a monogastric, like a pig or a horse or something like that, is because of that rumen. And when we talk about the rumen, there's kind of 4 different compartments of a ruminant stomach that we would talk about. But inside there is a microbial population that would be made up of bacteria, yeast, and protozoa. And what's unique about that is they can take a low quality protein source, meaning it has some amino acids that would be lacking for other species. Those rumen microbes can break that protein source down or we can actually give them just a straight nitrogen source, and they can turn that into high quality amino acids and high quality protein. The other thing that would be unique there is you or I couldn't survive on eating this grass because we don't have the enzymes to digest what we call cellulose and hemicellulose, which would be the fiber portion of this. Well, cattle themselves don't either, but because we have that symbiotic relationship with that ruminant and those rumen microbes can actually digest this forage. They'll ferment it into what we call VFAs. Those cows, or those steers in this case, would absorb those VFAs, and that's where we can get that energy from them. So we can take a very low quality, whether it be a forage source or some other feed source that's not great for a monogastric animal, and a ruminant animal like a cow can take great advantage of that.